everyone. I've got a special treat for you all today, and that's a little interview with Carl Angel.
Oh,
And I've known Carl for many years from when we were both illustrating at Children's Book Academy, and we've done all sorts of things together over the years. It's been a beautiful relationship.
indeed.
And Carl has a new book out called The Girl Who Saved Yesterday. And it's written by the extraordinary Julius Lester. And
Yes.
Carl, how many books have you done?
I've done 7, but two of them were anthologies that I contributed to
Okay.
for Children's Book Press on our block and honoring our ancestors, which is where I first met Mira.
Carl also works as a graphic designer and does all sorts of freelance illustration and all that kind of good stuff. So, Carl, I have some questions about this book, The Girl Who Saved Yesterday. It's a very spiritual book.
Yes.
It's very mythological, and it's full of metaphors, and it's a combination of like real world and fantasy world.
A very delicate balance between the two.
Yes, and it's a parable really
Mm-hmm.
about the importance of remembering the ancestors and respecting the land.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What were some of your challenges in doing this book?
Well, the challenge is primarily lie within trying to balance the illustrations with the sort of power and inspiration that I felt from Julius Lester's writing. His writing is very poetic in nature. Every other word is a metaphor, it seems like, and in a wonderful way, wonderfully expressive. And the thing for me was within his words, there's stuff that is literal and there's stuff that is metaphorical, and they're intertwined so delicately. And for me, the challenge as an illustrator was to try and figure out which one of those, since they're both equally appealing image-wise, which one of those should I focus on for the image? And I would try to do that through color and composition. And just the way Julius Lester balances those metaphorical and literal, I wanted to try and do that and share that sort of inspiration with the reader visually.
Can you show some examples?
Yeah, sure. The original work, you mean?
Both.
Okay. Well, for instance, here I'll show the cover. Something that's different is this is the cover of the book itself, and the original art piece actually had animals in the painting. First, it was suggested that perhaps the animals would add to the story of the relationship between silence and nature. Later, we had felt that, well, really, that the relationship between her and the trees was enough. And actually, I think that wound up being a better idea, as the animals in the story weren't really the focus, so they didn't play as much of a major role. So just to keep a relationship between her and the trees, I think was a better idea.
Well, one of the things that I'm really impressed with is that even though you've personified the trees, they're still so tree-like.
Yeah, part of the challenge of coming up with the characters of the trees, and it's funny because they look relatively simple in design, but the journey it takes to get there was long. Just because what I wanted to do in terms of trees embodying human aspects, I didn't want to get caught in Lord of the Rings or Tolkien territory. And it's very easy to do because Brian Froud has done that so wonderfully as an illustrator. For me, it was to try and maybe incorporate the African mask motif as facial features because they sort of look very primitive and simple and culturally more specific. And I felt that also it gave them a little bit more mystery if they weren't expressive in the way that Brian Froud's faces are. And I think it also gives them more like kind of an Easter Island type of quality, very also mythical, mysterious.
Because in the text, it doesn't, it's set in a village,
Yes.
but it doesn't specify where the village is or what the village is like. And so how did you come up with, say, an image like this? And the lighting is really terrible on this, by the way, folks. The illustrations are pretty stunning. They're pretty amazing. So how did you come up with that specific look for the village? You spoke about bringing in Easter Island influences, African influences. Can
I
you?
would actually go back and I mean what I had done actually was I would actually look at various cities in the US and try and have some of the patterns on the huts represent some different cities and then try and incorporate that. It's very, very subtle though, so it just wound up actually looking fairly generic in the end. But I would look at different reference and see just stylistically what sort of elements I could plug into that sort of fit the inspiration of the text. I actually start with the text first before I start with the reference, just because I want to see what's going to come out of my own head first, and then kind of connect it stylistically with any real world cultural references. Because I think if you start the other way around, I think there tends to be, for me, a need to be slavish or very bound to those cultural references first.
Uh-huh.
So if I started with my own whimsical idea of what it was, then at least part of me is in there first, beforehand, and then to connect it stylistically with other elements.
So,
I,
like, what cities?
uh, Boston, Massachusetts, where Julius Lester was from. I wanted to, you know,
How
from
interesting.
just see where it went, and
Uh-huh.
I try and put in some of the colors. But sometimes it wound up looking like another. It didn't wind up looking African.
Uh-huh.
So then I would just have to dial it back. It was the same thing with the trees too. I'd get more elaborate in some of the way that the faces that I would make, that I would incorporate the faces into the trees. I would try to have branches turn and almost form into these round cheekbones, but then it wound up looking almost science fiction like, and then it looked like another planet versus something they could readily accept.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I had to dial it back and make it kind of and keep it basic, which is hard when you want to show that you're doing something different, but at the same time, if it's too much, then it takes away from what the story is supposed to imply, which is supposed to be something that's familiar, you know.
And
Yeah.
also something that has a universality as well.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and I think that by mixing these cultural references, because it is a mythological story, it's not like set in a specific place at a specific time with a specific culture. I think you're able to have that artistic freedom to draw from those different references. What about the costumes, the clothing?
For her, I basically it was almost primary in the way that I wanted her to stand out against all the other characters or the background, which is why she's in that yellow.
Uh huh.
I also want her to be this light, that comes into this village, and this little piece of light that winds up having to sort of face off against this big light with that mountain scene. So I mean, again, that's just a subtle element, but and again, very basic. But I still wanted to just have that there, and that's the reason for her color wise. The patterns, I was just looking for something that was simple and just repetitive, and I just sort of took something that I had seen in one of the references that I had come across that seemed to sort of match the color actually. And also keep in mind with the whole thing about this being something familiar and yet something different, the characters of the trees are named Wonder Boom, Thundercloud. So I mean there's also references it almost seems like to other cultures too.
Uh huh. Wow. And how did you manage to get that great testimonial on the back? Carl Angel's work dances off the page with vivid colors and dramatic page turns.
Bribery.
Oh, dramatic page design. The characters come to life in rich magical hues, leading the reader deep into Julius Lester's wonderful story. John Hendricks, author illustrator of Shooting at the Stars. He's awesome.
Yeah, no, John, he's one of my heroes. He's one of my heroes, both as a designer and an illustrator. Nobody, I mean, works a page quite like the way that he does.
Yeah, I agree.
You look at just movement. It's funny that pages in books are still forms. They're not animated and moving, but his does. And the great thing about that and a good book in general with that type of imagery is that you can look at it at that movement all around. You can appreciate it because it's crafted so well, so well. And for me, I that's great praise, and I hope that I've earned it. For me, it was just trying to match Julius Lester's words because what I just didn't want to do as an illustrator is to take such words that were just taking flight and then have the illustrations grab them and then just sink it.
Yeah.
You know, that's why it was a difficult thing to choose. Everything had to be. What's different about this different about this in comparison to any of my previous books that I had illustrated was that the words had to be considered carefully, and that I've never had to consider the narrative so carefully as I had with this because of the balance between the mythical, the literal, the metaphorical, and how do you achieve that same balance visually while not just accompanying the text because it's so magical, you know. You have to try and reflect it in differently with the same sort of majesty though, color-wise, color, composition, movement in the page, characters, you know.
Yeah, you were talking with me about your decision to have the trees, to personify them more, because I really think the trees steal the show in this. They're so incredible. You didn't just stick faces on them. There's,
Yeah.
you know, this is just beautiful. How much movement and how alive the trees feel, and how the faces are very mask-like, but also they convey power and emotion in ways that I think do really match the text. And I know you struggled with this. You did a lot of sketches, and people don't realize that. They think that you do the first sketch and that's it. And it's not. You just work it until you get to a place where you feel really good about what you're doing. And I think that's essential because if you're lucky, your book will have a long life.
Right.
And you want to feel good about it, 20 years from now. I have in Uncle Nacho's hat, I have my painting of shame. The painting that I knew I should have redone and I was just too beat and I didn't. And I've had to live with those, it's more than 20 years ago now. It's close to 28 years ago. These mutant cow pigs. Or pig cows. And they're supposed to be Brahmins and they're just really weird. And it's a small thing. Most people don't notice, but I certainly do. And I carry, all these years later, I carry that shame.
I think that goes with anybody. I mean, for me, I wish I had more time on this too. I mean,
How long did you have?
Well, from the time that the sketches were approved, I had about 6 or 7 months to do 16 paintings, essentially. And which would be great if that was all I was doing. But, I'm also raising my son and I'm doing other things too, other freelance work. And so it wasn't a whole lot of time. Most of the time that once the sketches are laid in, it's not that it's still very challenging all the way up to the end. But at least if you got a solid foundation for me, if I have a solid foundation of composition, drawing, and value, then I know that I have something that can take whatever I throw at it. I can play around with colors. I can play around. It leaves me free to sort of emotionally choose what colors I think will convey the emotion of Julius's text.
Yes.
And the thing about Julius, also, you talk about how books, how you want a book to have a long life. The way that Julius writes it's like old school Once Upon a Time narrative, which I love. I mean, I like lately there seems to be a trend of picture books being a little bit shorter, and I mean I like that too. If the story warrants it, then it's
not
fine.
Just a little bit; it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it warrants it, I mean, I like a lot of those too, but it's just so nice to just be enveloped in this lovely language and to say it, to read it out loud, and then to dwell on. You get to pick over it. I mean, this is stuff that it's not a one and done thing. You can always look at it over and over again and read it again and then feel oh, we're going to read this again. We're going to get transported again, in that old school magical way.
Yeah.
So visually, I had to match that because that's the effect I was feeling. It's like, oh wow, I can't. We haven't had a picture book by Julius Lester in a long time. I can't drop the ball on this.
Yeah.
I gotta at least rise up, and bring as much game as he brought, to this book, which for him is probably, I don't know, the guy's just he's a master at this sort of tricky.
Well, he's been doing it a long time, and that
Yes.
really helps, a long, long time. Carl, will you show us some of your favorite images from the book and talk about why they're your favorites?
Sure. Well, there is this one, of course, which I like a lot,
Uh-huh.
and just because of the intimacy of the tree carrying silence, and that they're on this journey, and also the fact that she has her friends accompanying her. It's a nice, cool piece, and then just to have the slight warmth of the fireflies right over here by silence. I mean, it just sort of set a nice.
Can you bring it closer to the screen?
It just sort of set a nice tone for the beginning of her journey.
Uh-huh.
And so I enjoyed this one very much just because I like rendering the tree a lot.
Uh-huh. And one of the things I really like too is when we look at the skin color, it's not just burnt umber. I mean, you've got purples in there, you've got pinks in there, you've got blues in there, you've got burnt umber in there.
Yeah, no, actually, and that was the thing. I mean, actually, when I was in illustration school, whenever we were in painting class depicting just using only just browns, the instructor was like, there's a lot more depth and a lot more colors in there that you could use that would actually communicate it more. And actually, you can actually see when you look closer. And then I would just look closer, like, oh yeah, that's right, So it's nice to know that training paid off somehow. But another one that I liked, which I believe was Julius Lester's favorite scene as well, is this. Actually, this was the one scene that the sketches that comprise this book, the earliest set of sketches, didn't make it to the final. I mean, they were actually all scrapped and started at sort of like a page 1 redo, except for this scene. This is the only one that survived that from that first set of sketches. I mean, I had a couple of alternate scenes for this and alternative sketches, but this one seemed to just work linearly, and also sort of leads to the next page. It serves a number of purposes.
Yeah, well, you've got great, warm against cool, with silence against the green of the grass and the blue of the sky.
Right.
And you've got that fabulous diagonal, which always makes for a much more exciting composition. And it's kind of like, where's Papa going with that axe?
Yeah.
Where's Silence going with that scythe?
Yeah, and sort of a bit of a with her going upward, it represents kind of a struggle, or maybe if that's too strong a word, I don't know, but some sort of trying to reach an objective.
Yeah.
And then with her marching up with a determined look, and the contrast of this space versus her up here, it just
balances. Yeah.
Yeah, it balances, and hopefully, it strikes the equivalent of whatever Julius Lester's words are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there was so much, and there were so many of them on this side that it was hard to figure out, like, which one should I illustrate, which few sentences, conveyed the image, and that would move the narrative forward.
Yeah. Carl, this has been really great. You don't have any of your other books handy that we could just hold up and show real quick?
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's the one there's Lacoste and the Middletown Fish.
I love this book. If you can buy this book, buy this book. And it's so different. I mean, it's really funny.
Yeah, Tony Robles, he's another poet, and his stuff is his sense of humor is uniquely Filipino, and it made him the perfect guy to kind of to sort of write for the community. And the thing with this book, it's a whimsical tale about this fish that winds up here. Let me turn to something here. This fish that breaks out of a fish market in Manilatown and winds up running up Kearny Street and all the way to the bay. And that's very whimsical and lyrical and funny, but the in the manuscript, there's times where Tony is referring to different areas of Manila town that no longer exist, and the community that was sort of moved out by gentrification. So there's this very serious undercurrent happening here. And for me as an illustrator, it was like, how do I communicate that without being didactic? Because Tony communicated that without being didactic. And so for my solution to that was to sort of draw the geography of that neighborhood, but instead of just depicting the buildings as buildings, I collaged pictures of the people that used to live in that neighborhood so that you're kind of quietly honoring them visually, just the way that Tony was through his writing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. Let's see some more. I love that book.
Yeah, so do I. And we need to do a third one, you know. And then there is also Sky High, which I did with Marissa Moss.
And Marissa Moss is the publisher of Creston Books, who did The Girl Who Saved Yesterday. And I spoke about that in the blog post I did.
This is about a real woman, Maggie G, who was one of the WASP, the Women Air Service Pilots in World War II. And Maggie always had this dream of flying. She wasn't necessarily into war, but the war provided her with an opportunity to fly. And
can I just point something out really quickly?
Sure.
This is what's known as a worm's eye view. So we're looking up from underneath. And Carl is a master of perspective and foreshortening and things like these. Just got really brilliant art chops. And we can tell we're looking up from underneath because we can see under the chin and we can see inside the nostrils.
Yeah, and also it was nice to sort of do it from a child's point of view. It also helps that the subject matter is about planes and aircraft, so you're looking up at the sky anyway. But eventually, Maggie got the opportunity in World War II to fly planes because they were so strapped for personnel. This is her actually driving off to Texas with some of her friends. They actually learned how to drive a car on their way to applying for training camp. And then she passed, the other two of her friends didn't. So, but at least they knew how to drive home. She stayed.
So, Carl, why don't you just show us a couple of, look at fabulous stuff. Really fabulous. Carl's website is Carl Q Angel, or is it just
carlangel.com?
You dropped the Q, good. It's easy for people to find you that way. I mean, wow. Just awesome. Why don't you just show us some covers because we're running out of time here.
Let's see. All right.
And so you can see that Carl works very hard to balance his colors and to also balance his compositions. Willie Mays, awesome.
The second Lacoste book, Lacoste in the Makibaka Hotel.
And there's even an Elvis impersonator in this one.
As there are many Filipino ones, but many in general, I guess.
Yeah, Filipino Elvis impersonators.
And Social and Flowers from Jorge Argueta, who's another extremely just brilliant poet.
And he's a lovely, lovely person too.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think, there is honoring our ancestors, and there's oops. Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess my son must have that book.
That's kind of sweet.
Yeah, he's got my other books.
Yeah, and Carl
He likes to read them, which is good.
Carl and I are in that book together, along with a bunch of other pretty amazing people. And I remember Carl saying to me, that book should be called "I'm So Honored to Be in This Book." Carl, thank you so much for sharing this. One last thing I want to point out is the scale of Carl's illustrations is at 140% of the finals.
Sometimes it's anywhere from 115 to 140%.
Yeah.
I always find that the saturation increases and things get tighter when they shrink in print.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
Yeah, it hides little boo-boos if you work bigger. Whereas if you work smaller and large, it goes the other way.
Yeah, everything else is magnified. I know. Yeah.
Not so good.
Yeah.
Though it can be great for line work too. If you start small, I can't remember her name, another brilliant illustrator. Anyway, she draws small and then enlarges it so that she gets a really great line quality. So, Carl Angel,
Yes, Mira Risberg.
thank you.
Thank you, Mira.
And everyone, I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you, everybody.